250 years. That's roughly how long a global superpower stays on top of the world order. The Dutch got about 250, British got about 250, and just this week, the United States of America turns exactly 250 years old, and right on schedule, the warning lights are flashing. The dollar's share of global reserves has fallen from 72% to under 57%. The national debt has surpassed $39 trillion, and the United States every year spends more than $1 trillion just on interest. Central banks around the world are dumping U.S. treasuries and quietly buying something else. Now, everyone assumes the next global superpower will be China. Ray Dalio wrote a 500-page book about this cycle, and he points to the East. But when you run a checklist of what actually makes up a global superpower, the reserve currency, net exports, and trust, China fails all three tests. So does Russia, and so does every country in Europe. The next global superpower passes all three tests, and it has no flag, no capital, and no army. By the end of this video, you'll understand why its rise is the single best possible outcome for America and American citizens, and how to position yourself before the rest of the world figures it out. And stick to the end of the video, because there's a company located 5 miles from the Pentagon that might already be the blueprint. Let's start with the pattern, because if you don't see the pattern, nothing else in this video matters. Ray Dalio studied the last 500 years of rising and falling empires for his book, Principles for Dealing with the Changing World Order. He found that great powers follow a remarkably consistent arc, roughly 250 years, give or take. Rise, peak, decline. The Dutch dominated global trade during the 16 and 1700s. The guilder was the world's money, then debt, war, and internal conflict ended their run, and the British took the baton. The pound sterling ruled the 1800s. Then, 2 world wars bankrupted Britain, and in 1944, at Bretton Woods, the world formally handed the crown to the United States and the dollar. Here's the poetic part. America declared independence in 1776, right as the Dutch era was dying and the British era was peaking. This week is July 4th, 2026, 250 years almost to the day. Now, cycles aren't prophecies. Nothing collapses because a calendar says so. Empires collapse for mechanical reasons, and that mechanism has a name. In 1960, an economist named Robert Triffin stood in front of Congress and explained why the dollar system would eventually break itself. Not might, would. It's called the Triffin Dilemma, and it has 3 parts. Part 1, when your currency is the world's reserve currency, every country on earth needs to hold it. Foreign central banks, and foreign companies. They all need dollars. Part 2, the only way to get dollars in their hands is to send more money out than you take in. You run trade deficits. You become the world's net importer. They send us goods, we send them paper. Sounds like a great deal, and for a while it is. Economists literally call it exorbitant privilege. So where is America on that timer? Let's take a look at the dashboard. $39 trillion in debt and on pace to cross $40 trillion later this year. We're paying over $1 trillion a year just in interest. And the world is responding exactly like Triffin predicted. In 2001, the dollar was roughly 72% of global central bank reserves. Today, that number is under 57%. Central banks have been buying gold at a record pace for 3 straight years. They're not dumping the dollar overnight. They're diversifying away from it quietly, methodically, exactly like they diversified away from the pound a century ago. The Dutch went through this, the British went through this. The reserve currency is always the last thing to go, and it's already on its way out. So the obvious question, who's next? And everyone gives the obvious answer, China. But run the superpower checklist on China and it falls apart fast. The yuan is less than 2% of global reserves, single digits. 2. China runs capital controls, meaning money cannot freely enter or exit the country, which disqualifies you from reserve status on day 1. And after watching Russia's reserves get frozen in 2022, No central bank on earth wants their national savings sitting inside a rival's banking system. That goes for holding dollars, and it goes double for holding yuan. And that's the deeper realization. Problem isn't which country issues the next reserve currency. The problem is that any country issuing it recreates the exact same Triffin trap with a different flag. Same game, new player, same ending. The world doesn't need a new empire's money. It needs money with no empire attached at all. If you see where this is going, comment the word cyberspace below. I read every comment, and I want to see how many of you figured it out before I gave the reveal. The reserve asset is Bitcoin. And here's the part almost nobody frames correctly. Bitcoin is the first reserve asset in history with no Triffin dilemma. No nation has to run a deficit to supply it to the world. No government can print it to fund wars or bail out banks. The supply is capped at 21 million forever, enforced by math instead of by politicians' promises. Every previous reserve currency failed because its issuer eventually abused that privilege. Bitcoin has no issuer to abuse it. Productive engine is artificial intelligence. Think about what a superpower economy actually does. Exports more value than it imports. AI imports exactly one thing from the physical world: energy, and it exports everything else: software, engineering, research, legal work, medicine, entertainment, intelligence itself, on tap, sold to every country on Earth simultaneously. Cyberspace runs a permanent trade surplus with the physical world. It is the ultimate net exporter, which is exactly the position America held in 1945 when it took the crown. And notice how the two pillars connect. Bitcoin converts energy into incorruptible money. AI converts energy into goods and services in abundance. The reserve currency and the export economy of the digital superpower both run on the same input: energy in, value out. That's the whole empire. Now, here's where I break from the doomsdayers, because I think this transition is the best possible outcome for America for three reasons. First, consider the alternatives. If the dollar loses reserve status to the yuan, America's savings, trade, and sanctions leverage end up at the mercy of a rival. If it loses status to Bitcoin, it loses to a neutral protocol that treats every nation equally and cannot be weaponized against anyone. Given that the 250-year clock is ticking regardless, neutral beats hostile every single time. Second, America is already positioned to win the new game. The US government holds roughly 360,000 Bitcoin in its strategic reserve, more than any other nation. American ETFs and companies hold millions more coins. The AI labs are American, and a huge share of global Bitcoin mining runs on American energy on American soil. But let me show you how much further this could go, because there's a scenario hiding in plain sight that almost nobody is talking about. There's one company that holds more Bitcoin than any government on Earth: Strategy, formerly known as MicroStrategy, with over 800,000 Bitcoin. Now look at the pattern. The company is headquartered in Northern Virginia, Tyson's to be specifically, right in the government's backyard. Its original business was selling enterprise software, and some of their biggest clients were the FBI, the Department of Homeland Security, the CIA, and all the other three-letter agencies. It has decades-old relationships with the exact agencies that would custody a national Bitcoin reserve. In the 12 months after Trump's 2024 election victory, Strategy stacked more than 370,000 Bitcoin, one of the most aggressive accumulation runs in Bitcoin history, timed precisely to the most pro-Bitcoin administration ever elected. Then it dropped Micro from its name and rebranded to simply Strategy. The government's Bitcoin stockpile is called the Strategic Bitcoin Reserve. You can call that branding coincidence if you want. And Michael Saylor is a history buff obsessed with legacy. What's a bigger legacy, running a software company or becoming the man who capitalized America's reserve asset for the next 100 years? And here's why this isn't a pipe dream. In 2025, the US government took an equity stake in Intel because chips were deemed strategically critical. Precedent is set Washington now takes ownership positions in companies it considers essential to national power. If Bitcoin becomes the neutral reserve asset we've been describing, the single largest corporate treasury of it, sitting 5 miles from the Pentagon, run by a man who already sold software to the intelligence community, is an obvious acquisition target. To be clear, this is speculation. I have no inside information, and neither does anyone else that I'm aware of. But empires don't publicly announce transitions. You spot them by watching where the assets accumulate, watching where the money moves. And right now, assets are accumulating in Northern Virginia. Britain lost the old game and faded. America can lose the old game and still own the biggest stake in the new one. No empire in history has had that option. Third, and this is the part I find beautiful, Bitcoin is 1776 with better technology. Think about what the founding fathers actually revolted against: a distant authority basing their money, seizing their property, and taxing them without consent. So they built a system on property rights, checks and balances, and sound money. The Constitution literally made gold and silver the only legal tender for the states. 250 years later, Bitcoin enforces one of those core principles with code instead of ink and paper. Fixed supply, property that cannot be seized, rules without rulers. America's founding ideals aren't dying. They're migrating to a substrate that no government, including ours, can corrupt. So, what do you actually watch from here? Well, before I answer that, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to smash the like button and subscribe to our free newsletter. Every week, I publish in-depth insights into all things Bitcoin, Bitcoin mining, and macroeconomics. You can subscribe for free. We've got over 120,000 subscribers already. Come join the fun. A link is in the description below, or go to newsletter.blockwareintelligence.com. So, what do we watch from here? 4 gauges. Dollar's share of global reserves, it's 57% and falling. Foreign holdings of U.S. Treasuries, sovereign accumulation of neutral reserve assets like gold and Bitcoin. And fourth, Washington's relationship with strategy. Any hint of a partnership, a custody deal, or an equity stake, and the whole thesis accelerates. The Dutch, who saw the British century coming, got positioned early. British, who saw the American century coming, got positioned early. You're living through the next handoff, except this time the territory being claimed has no borders, and anyone can become a citizen with any amount of money. Happy 250th, America. The best way to honor 1776 might be recognizing when it happens again. If you want deeper data behind this, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next video.